I came back from the hospital on a Tuesday near the end of October. When I walked in, my bedroom door was locked from the inside. Not jammed, not broken, locked with a brand new deadbolt I had never seen before. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, still holding the overnight bag from my 3 days at St. Michael's. For a second, I thought maybe I'd walked into the wrong house. But no, that was my coat rack. Those were my boots. That was the framed photo of my late wife, Ellen, on the side table, taken at Killarney Park the summer before she got sick. This was my house, my name on the deed. My mortgage paid off 11 years ago, and my bedroom door had a lock I never installed. I set the bag down, walked to the kitchen. My son-in-law was sitting at the table eating a bowl of cereal in his undershirt at 2 in the afternoon. "There's a new lock on my bedroom door," I said. He looked up. "Yeah, my parents need that room. They're moving in this weekend. I need you to understand something. I'm not a man who raises his voice. I never have been. 31 years as a site supervisor for a civil engineering firm outside Barrie teaches you fast. The loudest man in the room is rarely the most dangerous. I've always been quiet, patient. My daughter has told people her whole life that her father never yells. But standing there, watching him spoon cereal into his mouth like he hadn't just said something completely insane, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger exactly, something colder, clarity. "This is my house," I said. He shrugged. "You've got that spare room down the hall." "It's fine, the spare room. 140 square feet, one window facing the back fence. I'd been sleeping in the master bedroom for 26 years. Ellen and I picked every piece of furniture in it together. I'd repainted it twice. Her winter coats were still in the closet because I couldn't bring myself to donate them yet. He wanted to put me in the spare room so his parents could have my bedroom. I nodded once, picked up my bag, walked to the spare room, closed the door quietly behind me, sat on the edge of that small single bed and thought very carefully about what to do next. Let me tell you how we got here. None of this happened overnight. Ellen passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I spent every one of them holding her hand. She was the kind of woman who apologized to the nurses at the very end. I haven't been the same since, and I don't expect to be. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter, because that's what she is to me, no matter what. She and her husband had been renting a condo in Mississauga. After Ellen died, she called and said she was worried about me being alone in the house. She said it would be good for both of them if they came to stay a while. She said she could look after me. I said yes because I was grieving, because she was my daughter, and because the house felt enormous and silent at night. That was 3 years ago. At first it was fine. My daughter cooked sometimes. Her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law because I don't have another name that fits, was mostly harmless. He worked remote sales for a company that always seemed on the verge of something big, but never quite got there. He talked about money constantly, the way people do when they don't have enough of it. Full of theories and resentments and plans. I charged them nothing, not a dollar. I paid the property taxes myself, the utilities, the internet he used for work and she used for streaming. My pension from the company, plus Ellen's life insurance, left me comfortable. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't struggling, and they were family. You don't charge family rent? That's not how I was raised. What I didn't understand then was that not charging rent would be read as something different than generosity. It would be read as the beginning of a renegotiation. It happened slowly, the way erosion happens. You don't notice the riverbank changing until the tree falls in. 18 months in, my son-in-law started calling the house our place in conversations with friends. I heard him on the phone once. "Yeah, come by our place, I'll send you the address." I told myself it was just casual speech, not worth a conversation. 2 years in, he started making decisions without asking me. He had a buddy repaint the garage because he thought the color was dated. He didn't ask. I came home from grocery shopping and there was a man I didn't know rolling beige over the deep red Ellen and I had chosen in 2009. I stood in the driveway for a moment, then went inside and made tea. I told myself I was being flexible. That family requires accommodation. That Ellen would have wanted me to keep the peace. Then, 8 weeks ago, I had my gallbladder removed at St. Michael's. Routine laparoscopic. But I'm 67, so my doctor wanted me observed for 3 days. My daughter drove me there and said she'd pick me up when I was ready. When I called her the 3rd day, she said her husband would come get me. He showed up 40 minutes late and spent the drive home on a hands-free call, arguing about a commission dispute. I walked into my own house, found that lock, and I had been awake since 5 a.m. I'd just had surgery. My hospital wristband was still sticking out of my bag. So I sat in the spare room and thought. First thing I did, called my friend Walter. We've known each other 40 years. Retired contractor. Sharp as a tack. And his son-in-law is a real estate lawyer in Barrie. I explained the situation. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Raymond, that is your house. Don't you do anything until you've talked to Kevin." Kevin called me back within the hour. I told him everything, the lock, the bedroom, the parents moving in that weekend. He asked me one question. "Is your name the only name on the deed?" I said yes. "Then here's what you need to know," he said. "In Ontario, my daughter and son-in-law were licensees, there with my permission, paying no rent, no formal lease. I had the right to ask them to leave with reasonable notice, and installing a lock without my consent was technically an alteration of my property without permission. More importantly," Kevin said, "if he brings his parents in this weekend without your agreement, you have people living in your home who you never invited. That changes things fast, and not in your favor. You need to move before Saturday." I asked him what I needed to do. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to do this. My daughter is my daughter. Whatever choices she made, whatever she let happen in that house, she's still the little girl who sat on the kitchen counter and handed me tools while I fixed things under the sink. She's Ellen's child. I did not want any of this. But I also knew, sitting in that spare room, that if I did nothing, I would wake up in a house I didn't recognize. The man who'd eaten cereal in my kitchen and shrugged at me would have his parents installed in my bedroom by the end of the week. The quiet, patient man I'd always been would end up eating breakfast at his own table as a guest. And I thought about Ellen, how she'd worked and saved and loved that house. Her winter coat still in the closet. I picked up my phone. The next morning, I called a locksmith. I had the new deadbolt removed and the original lock restored. Then I had every exterior lock in the house rekeyed. I kept one new key for myself. No copies. Then I called my son-in-law into the living room. My daughter was at work. I timed it that way on purpose. I sat in the chair by the window, the armchair that's been there since 1997, and waited for him to sit on the couch across from me. He looked slightly annoyed, like I was about to waste his time. "I've had the locks changed," I said. He stared at me. "The bedroom is mine. Your parents will not be moving in. And I need to talk to you and my daughter together tonight about the living arrangement going forward." He leaned forward. "You can't just do that. We live here. You live here because I invited you to. That invitation has conditions, and those conditions have not been respected. Your daughter is not going to be happy about this." "I expect not." He stood up. "We'll see what she has to say." "We will." At 7 a.m. my daughter came home. I could tell by the sound of the door they'd already spoken. She walked into the kitchen where I was making dinner and stood in the doorway with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was 16, the night I told her she couldn't go to that party in Vaughan. "Dad," she said. "What is going on?" "Sit down. I'll explain at 7. Dad, his parents are counting on that room. They already gave notice on their apartment. That is not something I was consulted on. You live here alone. You have a whole extra room. I live here. Period. Not alone. Not as a guest. I live here. This is my home." Something in my voice that night was different from anything I'd said in 3 years of quiet accommodation. I think she heard it. She sat down. At 7 we sat at the dining room table, the three of us. I'd made notes on a piece of paper folded in front of me, an old habit from 30 years of site meetings. I told them 3 things. First, the master bedroom is mine and stays mine. His parents cannot and will not move in. If they already gave notice on their apartment, that was a decision made without my knowledge or consent, and I am not responsible for it. Second, I've spoken to a lawyer. As of tonight, I'm giving you 60 days' notice to find alternative living arrangements. That's more than legally required, and more than generous under the circumstances. I'm doing it because my daughter is my daughter, and I want to give you time to find something proper. Third, I am not doing any of this with anger. I'm doing it because a lock was put on my bedroom door while I was recovering from surgery. Because I've let things slide far enough. And because Ellen's house deserves better than what it's become. My son-in-law pushed back hard. He talked about disruption, about how expensive Barrie rentals had become, and he wasn't wrong. The market is brutal. He said they'd been there 3 years. Didn't that count for something? It counts for a great deal, I said. That's why I'm giving you 60 days instead of asking you to leave this weekend. He said, "You're doing this because you never liked me." "I'm doing this because someone put a lock on my bedroom door while I was in the hospital." My daughter was crying by then, not loudly. Hands flat on the table, looking down, shoulders shaking slightly. I wanted to reach across and put my hand over hers, but I kept my hands folded. "I love you," I said. "That's not in question. But this is my home, and I should never have let things get to where they are. That's my fault as much as anyone's. My son-in-law's parents did not move in. He called his brother in Hamilton that night. The next morning, he told me his parents would stay with the brother instead. He said it like he expected me to feel guilty. I said I was glad they had somewhere to go. The 60 days were not easy. For a long stretch, my daughter barely spoke to me at breakfast. My son-in-law became elaborately polite, the way people get when they're furious and trying to perform calmness. I cooked dinner every night, set 3 places at the table. Nobody said very much. But here's what happened in week 5. I was in the backyard on a Saturday morning raking leaves. Ellen used to love the fall. She'd make a pot of apple cider, and we'd do the yard together, taking twice as long as necessary because we kept stopping to talk. That morning it was just me and the rake and the smell of turning leaves. I was missing her very specifically and very hard. My daughter came outside and stood beside me. She didn't say anything at first. She just picked up the second rake, leaning against the fence, and started on the other side of the yard. After about 20 minutes, she said, "I didn't know he'd put the lock on. He told me he was getting some maintenance done while you were in the hospital." I stopped raking. She said, "I should have asked more questions. I should have been paying more attention to a lot of things." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry, Dad." We raked the rest of the yard in silence. When we were done, she went inside and came back out with 2 cups of tea. We sat on the back steps the way Ellen and I used to sit. It wasn't Ellen, and it wasn't the same, but it was my daughter. And she was there. They found an apartment in Innisfil, about 20 minutes south. A 2-bedroom, 2nd floor, decent building. I helped them move on a cold Saturday in December, 2 loads in my truck. My son-in-law and I weren't warm with each other, but we were civil. He carried boxes. I carried boxes. We didn't discuss what had happened. When they were settled and the truck was empty, my daughter hugged me in the parking lot for a long time. "Come for dinner next Sunday," she said. I said I would. I drove home on the highway with the heater on and the radio playing and the truck empty behind me. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. The house was quiet. My bedroom door was unlocked. Ellen's winter coats were still in the closet. I still wasn't ready to move them. But someday I would be. I went inside and made myself dinner. For the first time in 3 years, I ate it at my own table in my own home without anyone else's plans pressing down on the room. I thought about what my daughter had said, that she didn't know about the lock. I believed her, not because it made my son-in-law's choices acceptable, but because I know my daughter. I know the difference between her guilt and her performance of guilt. What I saw on those back steps was real. I also thought about the 3 years I'd spent not saying anything. The garage paint, the our place. All the small surrenders that had added up into something large enough to produce a stranger's deadbolt on my bedroom door. I had let that happen. Not maliciously, not foolishly, but I had let it happen because grief had made me soft in the wrong places. And I had confused accommodation with love. Ellen was not a woman who would have confused those things. She was the kindest person I've ever known, and she also knew to the inch where her boundaries were. She would have had a conversation about house expectations in the first month. Gently, completely. She would have made tea first. I'm still learning from her. My son-in-law and I have reached something that isn't friendship, but isn't hostility either. He comes to Sunday dinners. He's good to my daughter mostly, and he has not since that October afternoon ever again spoken about my home as though it were his. I don't know if that's growth or just adjustment to new information. Maybe it doesn't matter. My daughter and I talk on the phone most evenings. We've started going to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings when the weather allows, the way she and Ellen used to. She looks like her mother when she laughs, at the right angle. I'm not always ready for that when it happens, but I'm grateful every time. And my house is my house again. Some people, when I've told pieces of this story, ask whether I think I was too hard, whether 60 days was enough, whether I should have talked to them sooner, before things escalated, whether a father who loved his daughter would have handled it differently. I think about that question. I think I should have talked much sooner. That's the honest answer. I should have said something when he first said our place on the phone. I should have said something about the garage. I should never have let 3 years of small silences accumulate into a crisis. But I also know this. The man who waited 3 years before saying something was a man half submerged in grief, trying to hold his family together with the one thread he had left. I don't think that man was wrong. I think he was doing what he could with what he had. What I know now, standing in my kitchen on a February morning, making coffee in the house I've lived in for 26 years, is this. A home is not just a building. It is the place where the people you love have lived and the people you've been have existed. You do not surrender that. Not to grief, not to accommodation, not to a man who eats cereal in your kitchen and shrugs. Ellen used to say that the quietest rivers cut the deepest channels.